Imagine you live in a sea of ruins, a city carved up by conquerors, an island of democracy in a vast red ocean. One morning, you wake up to find that every road, every railway, every canal leading to your home has been severed. The electricity is cut, the food supply is gone. 2.5 million people, including you, have been sentenced to starve, or freeze, or surrender. This is not a hypothetical scenario. This was the reality for the people of West Berlin in 1948. It was a brutal gambit, a checkmate move in the opening game of the Cold War. But what the aggressor didn't count on was the sheer stubborn refusal of the free world to let a city die. What happened next was one of the most audacious, improbable, and inspiring rescue missions in human history. This is the story of how an endless chain of airplanes saved a city from the brink of extinction. This is the story of the Berlin Airlift. To understand the crisis, you have to understand the map. After World War II, Germany was defeated and divided. The victorious Allies, the United States, Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union, each took control of a zone of occupation. But the capital city, Berlin, was a special case. Despite being located deep inside the Soviet zone, over 100 miles from the nearest Western-controlled territory, Berlin itself was also carved into 4 sectors. This created a bizarre and dangerous geopolitical anomaly, West Berlin. A small isolated pocket of capitalism and democracy, governed by the Western Allies, existing entirely within the Soviet Union's communist sphere of influence. For the Western powers, it was a symbol of their commitment to a free and democratic Germany. For the Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin, it was a bone in his throat, a constant irritating showcase of Western prosperity and freedom right on his doorstep. As the late 1940s progressed, the Cold War began to crystallize. The wartime alliance between the Soviets and the West had fractured into bitter suspicion and ideological rivalry. The West, through the Marshall Plan, was pouring money into rebuilding Western Germany's economy. In June of 1948, they took a crucial step. They introduced a new currency, the Deutsche Mark, into the Western zones to combat rampant inflation and stabilize the economy. They introduced it in West Berlin too. For Stalin, this was the final straw. He saw it as a move to create a separate, powerful West German state, a direct threat to his control over Eastern Europe. He decided it was time to squeeze the Western Allies out of Berlin for good. On June 24, 1948, Stalin made his move. Citing technical difficulties, the Soviet military administration abruptly and completely severed all land and water routes into West Berlin. The autobahns were closed, the railway lines were cut, barge traffic on the canals was halted. The Soviets also shut off the main electricity supply, plunging much of the city into darkness. It was a stranglehold. West Berlin was not self-sufficient. It depended entirely on the outside world for its food, its fuel, and all its raw materials. The city had only enough food for about a month and enough coal to heat its homes for a few weeks more. Stalin's calculation was simple and brutal. He would starve the city into submission. He believed the Western Allies had only 2 choices, either abandon West Berlin, handing him a monumental propaganda victory, or try to force their way through the blockade with armored convoys, an act that would almost certainly trigger World War III. The American military governor in Germany, General Lucius D. Clay, a man known for his iron will, immediately recognized the gravity of the situation. He declared, "When Berlin falls, West Germany will be next. If we mean to hold Europe against communism, we must not budge." But how? The military options were terrifyingly risky. The diplomatic options were non-existent. The city was dying. A new, seemingly impossible idea began to take shape. While Stalin controlled the ground, he had made no mention of the sky. The idea was on its face insane. Could you really supply a city of 2.5 million people entirely from the air? The daily needs were staggering. Thousands of tons of flour, milk, meat, and potatoes, and even more tons of coal to power what was left of the city's infrastructure and keep people from freezing to death in the coming winter. The largest airborne supply operation ever attempted had been a fraction of this scale. Many in Washington and London thought it was impossible, a logistical nightmare that would end in failure and humiliation. But President Harry Truman made the call. The Allies would not abandon Berlin, they would fly. On June 26th, just 2 days after the blockade began, the first American C-47 Skytrains laden with milk and medicine touched down at Tempelhof Airport in Berlin. Operation Vittles, as the Americans called it, had begun. The British called their effort Operation Planefair. The first few weeks were a struggle. The planes were too small, the crews were inexperienced, and the tonnage delivered was barely enough to keep the city from immediate collapse. It was clear they needed a new approach. The task of revolutionizing the airlift fell to one man, General William H. Tunner. A master of logistics, Tunner had run the famous Hump airlift over the Himalayas in World War II. He arrived in Germany and immediately implemented a system of ruthless efficiency. He standardized everything. Only one type of plane, the larger C-54 Skymaster, would fly in the main corridors. Flight crews were forbidden from leaving their planes upon landing. Instead, mobile snack bars on wheels were brought to them. Ground crews, mostly German civilians, became experts at unloading a 10-ton plane in under 30 minutes. Tunner's system was like a conveyor belt in the sky. Every plane flew the same route, at the same speed, at the same altitude. Landings at Tempelhof happened with breathtaking frequency. At the peak of the airlift, a plane was landing every 60 to 90 seconds. The sky over Berlin was no longer empty. It was a constant, roaring river of hope. The airlift was a marvel of machinery and logistics, but its true power came from its human heart. The pilots flew in grueling conditions, navigating through 3 narrow, 20-mile-wide air corridors. They faced treacherous weather and the constant threat of Soviet fighters buzzing their planes in acts of harassment. Yet they flew on. And then there was the story of Lieutenant Gale Halvorsen. One day, while watching a group of German children gathered by the airport fence, he realized they never begged for anything. He gave them the 2 sticks of gum he had in his pocket. Seeing their joy, he promised to return the next day and drop more candy from his plane. To let them know which plane was his, he told them he would wiggle his wings. True to his word, he did. Soon, other pilots joined in. They attached candy and chocolate to tiny handmade parachutes and dropped them for the children of Berlin. He became known as the Rosinen Bomber, or the Raisin Bomber, and the Candy Bomber. The story became a global sensation. Candy manufacturers in America donated tons of sweets to the cause. It was a small gesture that had a monumental impact. It symbolized that this airlift wasn't just about delivering coal and potatoes. It was about delivering dignity, kindness, and proof that the outside world had not forgotten them. The Berliners themselves were the true heroes. They faced a brutal winter with minimal fuel and electricity, living on meager rations. But instead of turning against the Western Allies as Stalin had hoped, their resolve hardened. They worked on the airfields, unloaded the planes, and showed a defiant spirit that amazed the world. These were the same people the Allied pilots had been bombing just 3 years earlier. Now, they were partners in a shared struggle for freedom. The airlift didn't just save a city, it transformed enemies into allies. The airlift relentlessly grew in scale. The Easter Parade of April 1949 saw the Allies deliver nearly 13,000 tons of supplies in a single 24-hour period, more than what used to arrive by rail each day. The operation was a stunning success, and it had become a catastrophic political failure for Joseph Stalin. His attempt to bully the West had backfired spectacularly. Far from showing American weakness, the airlift demonstrated American ingenuity, wealth, and determination to the entire world. It had also prompted the creation of a formal military alliance to counter Soviet aggression, NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Realizing his gambit had failed, Stalin quietly signaled his willingness to negotiate. On May 12, 1949, at 1 minute past midnight, the Soviet Union lifted the blockade. The roads and railways were opened once more. The airlift had lasted for 15 months. Allied pilots had flown over 278,000 flights, delivering more than 2.3 million tons of supplies. The city had been saved. The Berlin Airlift was the first major confrontation of the Cold War, and it ended in a decisive victory for the West, without a single shot being fired in anger. It drew a clear line in the sand. demonstrating that the United States and its allies would stand firm against Soviet expansionism. It solidified the division of Germany and of Europe, setting the stage for the next 4 decades of Cold War tension. But more than that, it remains one of history's greatest triumphs of logistics, courage, and the unbreakable power of human resolve. It proved that even in the face of overwhelming force, a promise kept and a city united could change the course of history. The Berlin Airlift showed the world that a commitment to freedom could be stronger than any wall or blockade. What lessons do you think we can learn from this incredible story today? Let us know in the comments below.